Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today's upload is a series of interviews that do go back to back, cause and effect, and you will see what I mean. Before I get into them, though, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click that like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click the bell icon. And folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. They do matter and they are appreciated. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's upload, shall we? All right, folks. So one of my probably most viewed videos is the interview where Brad discusses the time he was hunting dogmen. Actually, he wasn't hunting the dogmen during this experience, but he and his friend were saved by either an angelic being or a kind of an alien, a Pleiadian or a Nordic. I truly love listening to Brad's interviews, almost as much as Victor's, to be quite frank with you. And there are two uploads that go hand in hand and that really are cause and effect. And you will see what I mean right now. Brad, how are you, my friend?
I'm good, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Well, I appreciate you reaching out to me.
And I can tell you, as I talked to you about it in the pre-interview, this will be my last time on your show in the capacity of an encounter, because I am no longer going to do, because of what I've come across and the information that was given to me, I'm no longer going to go into the wilderness, whether armed, unarmed, by myself, not by myself, except with one exception, as I told you about, but we can talk about that later. But as far as coming on your show, in some other capacity, I'm open to that. But as far as coming on and sharing an encounter, I can promise you that this is my last encounter on your show, or anybody's show for that matter.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, you've felt like you've tempted fate. I mean, you've had those moments where you're like, oh man, I really did, and then you're going back out. But this experience, not only the feeling, but the information you received as well at the end of it all was what?
The confirmation.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start off with.
Let me say hello to your audience. It's been a while since I've been on,
Absolutely.
So I wanted to say hello to all of your audience. I listen to your shows as well. I think I've listened to just about every one of your shows. So not only do I consider you a friend, but I'm also a fan of your show, and I'm a fan of your work. So
I appreciate that. That's why I said you're a friend of mine and a friend of the channel. So, just talking to you on the private level, we've established a very good friendship. So I appreciate that. We find you in the woods of Flagstaff, Arizona. Can you tell us what exactly you were?
You want me just to get into the story then?
No, I want maybe why you were going out into the woods to start.
Well, yeah. Okay, so the last time I had what I would call a dogman encounter, even though I didn't really have the encounter, as you know, some people call it, some people in your audience have said it was an angel, and I'm not adverse to the idea that it was an angel, but there's also the possibility it was just some dude, right?
Right.
Some really good looking big dude. But in that area, I have now gone back. That happened, a couple of years ago now, and I have gone back at least a dozen times. Almost not quite to the same exact area, but within a mile or two of that area, because I have been working, getting myself in better shape, losing weight. I'm still, 230 pounds, but I had gotten up pretty heavy. And what I started doing was I started carrying weight. This particular time, I had 2 bricks in my backpack just to get me to the 60-pound level with all the equipment I was carrying. And there's a reason I'm doing this, not just to get in shape, but as I told you, I think I mentioned it in the email, that I am also getting myself ready, or in case something were to happen in the world where you really do have to start carrying weight like that and be armed all the time, which is a distinct possibility in this world that we live in.
Absolutely.
I've been killing 2 birds with 1 stone, right? I've been losing weight, getting in shape, but also getting used to carrying a lot of guns, a lot of ammunition, a lot of equipment, 60 pounds of weight on my back. And so that is what, to answer your question, that's what I've been doing over the last 2 years. And I like the area. It's about somewhere between, let's just say 6 and 9 or 6 and 10 miles north of Flagstaff. And it's to the east of the 89. So anybody that's listening, if they're in that area, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. It's a wooded area, but it's not necessarily like, East Coast woods like you're used to, Jeff. It's woods, but it's a little bit less dense.
Right.
So that's what I've been doing, right? And I have literally gone to the same area, I would say since the last encounter at least a dozen times, and I haven't seen anything larger than a coyote. So I guess I got a kind of a false sense of security. So this particular time, which would have been 2 weeks ago tonight, as a matter of fact, or 2 weeks ago today, I decided that I was going to push my luck, and I was going to do a 12-mile hike, 6 miles out and then 6 miles back. So that morning, I got up, I got all my equipment together, and got in my car, and I drove, and I parked about a half a mile from where I decided I was going to go into the woods. And, I wasn't wearing any camo, but I was wearing a polo shirt, tan colored polo shirt. I had a windbreaker on and some jeans, and then some tan colored Under Armour tactical boots, right? So I had green and brown colors on. So even though I wasn't wearing anything camo, I did, fit in pretty well with what the color of the terrain is. It was a beautiful day, low 80s, I would say, slight wind, not a cloud in the, literally not a cloud in the sky. Beautiful, beautiful. So I get up and I leave my house about 8 o'clock. Drive, it's about an hour and maybe an hour and 10 minutes to get to this particular spot. Rather uneventful, all that. I park and I decide, for whatever reason, I'm not sure exactly why I did this, but I parked my car. I have a Toyota. I parked it on the side of the road, and then I walked about a half a mile up to go in, walking, which would have been east into this forest. Now, I have kind of a phobia, and again, people are going to understand really what a walking contradiction I am, right? I have a fear of getting lost in the woods, right? Yeah. And I've always had it. I don't know why I have this fear, but I try to keep it when I go into the woods, I try to keep it as simple as possible, where if I go in due east, I try to stay on that path as straight as I can and then come directly back due west, right?
Yep.
And I didn't have GPS and all my equipment. You'd think I'd have that, but I didn't. I had a compass, which I know how to read, but I didn't have a GPS. But to give your audience an idea of the equipment I was carrying, I had a backpack on with 2 bricks in it. I had binoculars, a flashlight, and people are going to say, what are you carrying a flashlight for? Well, it wasn't because I knew I wasn't going to need it. It was just to get me used to having all of that equipment on. That's the reason I was doing this, right?
The necessity of pack.
What's that, brother?
Just a necessity in your pack that you're going to get used to.
It is something I'm going to need. So I'm trying to get used to carrying all of this. And I'm sure it's going to sound weird to some of your listeners, but I don't care because I'm kind of an eccentric guy, right? But I was carrying, binoculars, a flashlight, a Bowie knife, zip ties in a little packet on the back of my belt. I had a backpack on with food and water in it, 2 bricks. I had 26 rounds of 30-06 ammunition on stripper clips. I had 4 backups and then the 6 that were in my gun. I had over 100 rounds of .357 Magnum on me because I was carrying a 1903 A3, which is a World War II bolt-action rifle. For the gun nuts that are in the audience, they'll know what I'm talking about. It's a beautiful World War II weapon. And the one I own is in absolutely pristine condition. I mean, it's like museum quality. And I found out that it works pretty good too, right? Yeah. So I was carrying that. I was carrying on a thigh rig. I was carrying a 6-inch Smith & Wesson 686, which is a 7-round .357 Magnum. On my left shoulder, underneath my shoulder, I should say, I was carrying a 4-inch 686 as well, which is another 7-round .357 Magnum revolver, and then on my ankle I was carrying a Colt King Cobra, which is a 6-round 2-inch .357 Magnum. And so your people might be thinking like, God dang, he's carrying it, but I'm carrying all this for weight also, and just in case I ever am in a combat situation, I'm used to carrying all of these weapons and this, ammunition. Right. And I wore the windbreaker. I could have easily not worn the windbreaker, but I did that because I didn't want people to see me carrying the second revolver I had underneath my shoulder, right? Because, I didn't want, if I ran across anybody, I didn't want them like reporting me to the Rangers or anybody else. Like, oh, this guy's got a bunch of guns. Even though I did kind of look like a hunter, but to somebody that was really keen on equipment and stuff, they would have noticed like, wow, this guy's wearing a lot of different things, right? Yeah. So I wore a windbreaker. Anyway, it turned out to be okay because it wasn't that hot. It was the low 80s. So I decided that I was going to walk up from my car half a mile and then turn right, which would be east into this forest. It's probably about 9:15, 9:30 or so when I actually got there and started walking, right? And the first, I would say, quarter mile to a half mile was painful because I was getting used to the weight. When you're carrying, anybody in your audience who has ever carried that kind of weight, it hurts, right? And fortunately for me, I got used to it. My shoes are fairly broken in, so I got used to it. The only thing that was bothering me after about half an hour was my shoulders were hurting from carrying all that weight in the backpack. So I start walking, and like I say, about half a mile into it, I kind of hit a rhythm, and I got used to the pain and everything else. And as I started walking, I realized just, everything was beautiful. I mean, it was just absolutely beautiful out, right? And so I get to about, I don't know, it was probably an hour or maybe an hour and 10 minutes. I get to about the 3-mile point, right? And I stop, and it's just absolutely, I mean, it's breathtaking. That's the word. People say that a lot, but where this area is, it's breathtaking. I mean, it's just the woods. It's peaceful out. It's quiet. I hadn't seen any animals at that point. Nothing. I mean, besides birds, right? And I get to this point, and so I hadn't eaten that day, so I stop, and I have a couple of power bars. I drink some water. I unlace my boots a little bit. Not take them off, but I unloosed them a little bit just because I figured I was going to sit there half an hour. My goal was, I should say this, was to be back to my car before dark, right? And so I knew I had plenty of time because it's, 12 miles, it really shouldn't be more than a 4 or 5 hour walk.
Right. Yeah.
At this point, I had no knowledge I was going to run into Dogman, right? So after I ate and I sat there, and I actually just thought about taking a little nap, but I knew better than being in the forest and taking a nap like that, right? So I didn't, but I tell you, it was so calm and peaceful there that I actually almost did want to just put my head against my backpack and take a nap. It was just so nice. But I didn't. I decided I was going to get back on the road, so I laced up my boots, retightened them, put my backpack back on. Make sure everything's on my belt where it's supposed to be, and then I start heading directly due east again, which I didn't realize it at the time, but my time was really slowing down. I think it was because the forest was getting a little denser, and I was getting a little bit more tired, and I was walking slower because it was about another 3 hours or so before I got to the 5 mile point. And the reason that that's important is because when I got to this 5 mile point, I was up on this little, what I would call it, a ridge, so to speak. And there was this valley, and it wasn't a deep valley. It wasn't something you would picture when somebody says valley, but I don't know what word to use, right? It's just, it was like 20 feet below where I was, right? And it was like a real slow, the embankment was really gradual, right? It wasn't like a steep drop off. It was very gradual down. So I stopped there, and I drank some water, and I was just looking around, and I figured, okay, in another mile, because my pedometer I had said I was at 5 miles. So I thought, well, I'll go another mile. And I decided I was going to look around. So I bring my binoculars out, and I start looking around, and it's just absolutely beautiful. It was just breathtaking. That's the word I would use. And I notice, and here's where the story starts to get interesting, as I'm looking across the valley, I see it's like a hill on the other side. There's like the valley and all the trees in it. I could just see over the trees. And on the other side, I see this hill. And I see a big tree on the hill, and it's on this slanted hill, right? The tree's growing out of this hill, and it looked to me like there were some boulders, and then what it looked to be caves, but I don't know that they were caves. It could have just been, me not seeing clearly on what it was. It was a bush that looked like it. I don't know. I can't say for sure that it was caves, but that's what it looked like.
Right.
So as I'm looking, I noticed right by this tree, I was looking up at it at first, but when I started to look down at the ground or toward the ground, I see these 3 animals. And I immediately, it wasn't like the last time where I didn't know what I was looking at. I immediately knew what these were because of the size, because I could see them in relation to the tree, right? And we're talking, just for your audience perspective, I'm about, I would say, half mile from them right now at this point. So far enough out of their, they couldn't see me, right? Plus I was up, like I said, on this ridge. I suppose if they would have looked directly at me, they might have seen me, but they didn't. So I'm watching them, and I notice that as they look like they were kind of playing around this tree. I don't know if they had found something, or there was a rabbit they were messing around with, what they were doing, right? I never did find out what they were doing, but I noticed that each of them would take a few steps forward, and when it would stand up and sniff the air like they do, right? And they all took turns doing that. So I knew they smelled me then. They just hadn't seen me, and they didn't know what direction it was coming from. So I'm standing there, and I thought to myself, well, you've got a decision to make, Brad. I said, I knew right then, I knew for sure that I could pack up everything, turn around, and just cut 2 miles off my hike, and I would more than likely, not have any running with them and make it back, no problem, because I had a half mile start, number one, and number two, they didn't even know where I was. So it was one of those things where you're thinking okay, if I just, stop right now, I can avoid this completely.
Yeah.
But being who I am, and I've always wanted to be the guy that proved that these animals existed, right? Because so many people think that we're all full of shit, when the reality is they're the ones that are full of shit because they don't believe, right?
Yeah.
So
that's one thing I can say about you is, not only are you the person that wants to get the photo or the proof, but you, like, from day one, when I met you, you just said, first things first, I don't hunt. I'm not a hunter. I'm an adrenaline junkie. I'm an adrenaline junkie, and I want to get the proof. And that's,
we've said it many times on your show. The only thing I have going for me, I have two attributes that help me. Well, let's just be three. I am somewhat fearless. Some would say that's stupidity, and I'm open to that being the case. Number two, I am really good with a handgun, and it's not because I'm tactically trained. It's just because of the thousands and thousands of hours I've spent at the range. And I can hike pretty good. I've got pretty good endurance. I can hike for, if I needed to, I could probably do 20 miles in a day. Those are the only things I have going for me. I mentioned it in the email. I'm not a hunter. I'm not a woodsman. I don't know all the tricks. That's why I'm so proud of myself, and was getting more and more proud of myself when I was doing this, because I was going deeper and deeper into the forest by myself.
Yeah, and using the compass and stuff like that.
Yeah. Using the compass and, handling myself out there. And even though I hadn't seen anything, I was pretty damn proud of myself for doing it, because I'm not afraid to admit this. People have fears. I had a shark incident when I was a surfer in Southern California. It didn't actually attack me, but I thought it was going to attack me, and it scared the living shit out of me for the rest of my life. And I've never gone in the ocean past my knees since. Never. Yeah. Not once. And so I do have fears, and one of my other fears is getting lost in the woods. I don't know why. I don't know if it was a movie I saw when I was a kid or something, but I have always had this fear of that moment when you realize, oh shit, I'm lost, right? So, and back to the story. So, I'm just telling you guys that so you realize I don't think of myself as some tough guy or, some guy that, bloodthirsty was one of the words that the other show's people called me, right? Which is totally not true.
Yeah.
But, so I made the decision at that moment, which I would come to regret. I said, and of course you crossed my mind for a brief second. And I thought to myself, well, looking at the terrain, I think I can get within 100 yards or so of these animals and get some really good pictures, right? The problem is, and I don't even know why, you get caught up with adrenaline. Adrenaline is one of those things that it is literally like a drug.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you think to yourself, it makes you think clearly in some ways, but in other ways you don't think things through. And for some reason, it never occurred to me that these three animals that I was watching would not be there when I made the 1,000-yard or so. I can't say it was for sure that, but that's what I'm guessing, about 1,000 yards. About a half a mile was the length of this very shallow valley that I was speaking to you about. And so, for whatever reason, I just assumed, which looking back on it was completely stupid on my part, but I just assumed they would still be in that local area. So I said, okay. So I get up all my gear on. I thought that as I was looking at them, I thought that, okay, I'm trying to gauge, okay, where do I want to come to? I'm trying to see where might be a good spot to stop, maybe 100 or 150 yards from them to try to get picture. So I'm looking, I couldn't see anything because of the angle I was at. Even though I was above it, I wasn't high enough to see actually where I was going to come out at or any of that stuff. So it was kind of a blind decision that I made, but I decided to go ahead and do it. So I put on all my gear, and for your audience, remember, I'm not out there with any type of semi-automatic weapon, not even a semi-automatic handgun. I'm out there with
a 70-year-old bolt action.
80-year-old. It's 1944, an 80-year-old bolt action rifle, but it is in pristine condition. And two revolvers that I had access, because the one on my ankle is just basically like not having it, because there's no way I would have had time to get to it.
Right.
So basically, I'm out there with a bolt-action rifle and two .357 Magnum revolvers. Now, if you're going up against one of them, that might be adequate, but I'd already seen that there were three of them. So for whatever reason, it was a stupid mistake on my part. Again, it was just because I wanted to be the guy that proves that these animals exist. So I decided I'm going to go down there. I'm going to take the chance, and I'm going to go down there. So I put all my gear on, except for my binoculars, which I left hanging around my my neck, and I start walking down there. Now, at first, I wasn't trying to be quiet because I knew I wasn't that close to them yet. But when I got to about, I would say, halfway through the valley, we'll call it, I actually stopped for a second and I thought, I should probably take my backpack off because I can be quieter and I can be more agile if I have to move, right? Yep. But then I realized, well, if you end up having to encounter them and you have to leave, you're not going to stop to grab a backpack. I would stop for a gun no matter what was chasing me. You've learned that about me. But for a backpack, I probably wouldn't have stopped. Some people would say, well, you should stop for anything like that. But some of my gear is really expensive gear, and I didn't want to leave it. That's what it comes down to. I didn't want to leave my gear. So I decided I would just keep the backpack on, even though it meant less mobility and more noise.
Yeah.
So I'm about, I would say roughly, I don't know exactly, but I would say I'm about 500 yards from them at this point. And so this feeling is coming over me where I realize this is not a good idea, right? Because for whatever reason, these things hadn't occurred to me before, but I'm like I just told you, I'm thinking, my God, Brad, you're out here with an old bolt-action rifle and no semi-automatic weapons. You're by yourself. You're on their terrain in an area that they know much better than you. I start thinking about all these things, right? And I hate to admit this because it goes against what I consider myself to be, but I had a panic moment where I'm thinking, oh, shit, right? But now I'm halfway there, right? And so you have that macho part that kicks in. And so I said, okay, well, you know what? Get a hold of yourself. So I decided I'm going to move forward, right? But now I'm being really quiet, and I bring the 03 down off. I had been carrying it just on my shoulder, but I brought it down, and now I'm carrying it. So if I needed it, it was already loaded, by the way. I didn't have to work around into the chamber. I had 6 rounds ready to go. So I start walking, right? And of course, when I got to about, 200 or 300 yards from what I thought would be where they were, of course, everything went silent, right? That, you know how it goes. Everything went silent. There was no birds. There was no bugs, no nothing, right? And now I'm beginning to realize this is a really, really bad idea. So I walk a little further. I probably did get within 100 yards, right? And I'm standing behind this fairly thick tree, and I pull my binoculars up and I start looking because I see the rock and the tree where they were. It was maybe 100, somewhere between 100 and 150 yards from me. Let's just say that. And I'm looking through my binoculars so I could see right up close. And of course, none of those animals are there now. And so now I'm faced with, okay, I know for sure that they can at least smell me. They may not see me yet, but they can smell me for sure. And so I thought, okay, well, what am I going to do now if I decide to walk to where, if I expose myself out of this valley and I walk up onto that little hill where the tree was, wherever they are, they might be able to see me. So I said, okay, you know what? I gave it a shot, and I pretty much chicken shitted out, right? I said, okay, I'm gonna turn around and go back the way I came. But such fear came over me, more fear than in any of my encounters, even the ones in Oklahoma. There was something different this time. It was almost like I realized that I had pushed it one step too far.
Yep.
And I was scared to the point where my hands were shaking. And so I stopped. I said, okay, you're going to have to get a hold of yourself. No, because if you end up encountering these animals, you can't be in this condition. So I literally stopped. I leaned up again, put my back up against the tree. I took about 5 really deep breaths. And I said, okay, if they haven't seen me, there's still a chance that they just ran off, right? And they're not anywhere near me, and I can just hightail it back, and this will be a good story in and of itself.
Yeah.
So I start walking, and I don't know how far I got. I can't even remember now, but I got maybe back to the halfway point of the valley, and I hadn't heard anything. I'm trying to be as quiet as I can, but I'm also moving a lot quicker because I hadn't seen any of them. And I thought, okay, it's more than likely they just ran off and I'm just being paranoid right now.
Yeah.
But as I look to my left at about the halfway point, or shortly before it, I look to my left and I can see clearly. It was the most fucking. It was frightening, dude. You're gonna have to edit. I use an F-bomb there. You can edit that.
You're all right, buddy.
So I could see him clearly. He was about 100 yards or maybe a little less to my left, and he's standing behind a tree looking at me like he's peering out from behind the tree. He was on all fours, and he was peering out from behind the tree. And I looked at him, and I immediately froze, and I just looked at him, and we must have had a 10-second stare-off, right, where I'm looking at him. And the rifle was in my hand, but I didn't bring it up to fire at it, right? I just stood there because at that point I was thinking maybe I can just get out of here without having to shoot anything. So I said, okay, well, there's only the one, so I'm just going to keep walking. At this point, I kept telling myself, just get to the ridge and get back up out of this valley, right? So I just started walking. I picked up the pace. I wasn't trying to be quiet anymore because I figured if one knew about me, they all knew about me.
Yeah.
So I keep walking, and I keep looking behind me, and all of a sudden he's gone, right? And I was like, wow, okay, maybe he just ran on. Maybe, he got, because they know what guns are. I have no doubt. They hate the sound of guns. That I know. In my experiences, I've learned that they don't like being shot by them, number one, but they also don't like the sound of them. It scares them.
Right.
So I'm like, okay, well, maybe he just took off, right? And sure enough, when I get to within about 150 yards, I can clearly see the slight embankment going up to the position that I had been just, an hour before, or an hour and a half maybe before, whatever it was. And I noticed that I happened to look to my right. You got to picture me. I'm standing there. I got sweat dripping off of me. I'm holding this ancient bolt-action World War II rifle, dude, right? I got a bandana on with some fucking Oakley glasses, right? Yeah. Just to give your audience a real clear picture. And I happened to look behind me, and about 20 yards to my right and behind me, I see this. Well, obviously, it turned out to be a Dogman coming up. Now, at first, I thought he had already seen me and he was making his move to me, but I realized by the direction he was walking, he hadn't seen me. So, and I was kind of behind a tree, so I took a couple of quick steps and got behind a tree as best I could. But the reality was, because I had this big backpack on, I was still only probably 3/4 covered. Well, he kept walking, and he got about 3 yards ahead of me. I'm trying to explain this so your audience will understand exactly what I'm talking about. He was about 20 yards to my right, but I had turned to face him, okay? And he was about 3, maybe 4 yards ahead of me. So I was looking at him from behind a tree that was behind him, okay? If that makes sense to your audience. I'm kind of looking around the tree, and I can clearly see him, but because I was behind a tree, he didn't see me. If he would have looked directly at me, he wouldn't have seen me. But it looked to me like he was looking directly at where I was headed. Okay.
Back the way you had just come from an hour or so before.
Right. That's the very embankment that I came down that entered the valley, and he was looking up at it. Right. So I have no doubt he had smelled me.
Yeah.
Right. And I could tell he knew I was somewhere around. He just hadn't, for whatever reason, he hadn't seen me. I don't know. The man upstairs was watching out for me again. Right. So Anyway, I'm watching him, and I don't really know what to do at this point. Right. I'm looking around. I even tried as quietly as I could. I tried to bring my binoculars up and look around to see if it was just him or if the other two were bearing down on me, and I didn't see him. So I thought, okay, well, then, right then, as I look over at him, he stood up and he put his head up into the air. And of course, as you know, they have really large heads. Now, the description of this animal, because this was the best description I got when I was looking at him, because I was so focused on him, he was not what I call the German Shepherd or Belgian Malinois type that I had run into before. This particular animal and all three of them, I think all three of these were either brothers or related in their own little
like pack
somehow. Yeah, they were all together. They operated in conjunction together, right? And they were all young males. I could tell by their genitalia how they wasn't fully developed yet, number one. And number two, they were only, I would say, between 7 and 7.5 feet tall when they stood up. They were like a gray, and they had, there was some, black on them. It's hard, the coloring is hard to describe because there's so many like patchy, colors on them. But he definitely did not. He had a short tail, and he definitely did not look like what I have encountered before. I mean, in a general sense, he did, but not exactly like the, people say, the German Shepherd, right? This didn't look like a German Shepherd. He looked like a wolf with a big head and big teeth. That's how I would describe him. But he had the classic hands that look like what I've described as old people's arthritic hands. Yeah. I could clearly see his hands. And I don't know, I didn't think to pay attention to it because I was in such a panicked mode when it was happening. But I always had made a note, if I ran into one again, I wanted to see how their hands operate when they're running on all fours. Because I always thought it was interesting, like how do they use their hand like a paw when they're running on all fours? Yeah. Right? Yeah, it makes sense. No, nobody ever talks about that with these animals. They always just say, they dropped to all fours, or they stood up. But how do their hands don't change, obviously, into a paw. I don't believe, as you know, I don't believe in people, these animals changing appearances. So I've always wondered, like, how do they run on the hand? And I had made a mental note of that, but of course I didn't think about that at the time. But anyway, I digress. So as I'm looking at him, and I looked around and I saw that there were no other animals, he stood up to smell, right? And I knew it was just a matter of time. And there has such strong, which I would come to find out later in the story, how strong their smell is. So I knew when he stood up to smell, it was just a matter of seconds before he turned and looked at me. Well, when he stood up, he lifted his nose up. I mean, he presented a target that I just could not pass up. I mean, we're talking 20. It might not even have been 20 yards. It might have been 17, 18 yards from me. And when he tilted his head up, he just presented a target that even somebody like me that's not really a rifle guy, you can't miss that, that distance. So when he did that, I took a deep breath, aimed, and fired. And his head slammed because I hit him coming from his left, and his head slammed to the right. It was almost like it bounced off of his shoulder, and I could see the blood come out the other side of his head, the blood spray come outside of his head. Okay. And he went down, right? And then, of course, I looked around really quick. I looked around and I didn't see anybody, so I walked over to him, and he was, believe it or not, he was still alive. He was making like a gurgling sound, and his arms were kind of flailing. And I didn't, as bloodthirsty as everybody thinks Brad is, I didn't want him to suffer, right? So I walked up. I got within about 6 or 7 feet. I didn't want his arms to be able to grab me, right? But I got about 6, 7 feet away, chambered another round, and then I put the other one on top of his head, and he died immediately. Okay. So now I'm standing there, and I'm thinking, this is the moment I was telling you about, where I'm thinking, okay, now is the time to get your pictures, right? But something told me, it's just one of those moments where you just know, I don't even know how to explain it other than to say, you just know something is amiss. And I didn't even bother to pull out my camera, my phone. I just immediately turned, because I knew I just knew it. Something was coming, right? I could feel it. They heard the gunshot, something. The intuition. And it's intuition. That's what it was, dude. Almost like a chick, right? They have great intuition. That's kind of how I felt. Yeah. And so I turned I'm looking down at him after I had fired. I'm looking down. I turned to my left, but really far to my left. And I see, coming from the way I had been coming towards the embankment, I see both of them on all fours in that their head is lowered and they're prowling. Anybody who's seen a dog, when the dog is hunting and he's coming up on his prey, he'll lower his head, right? Like a wolf or a dog does, right? Yep. And both of them, they were only maybe 3 feet apart, and they were, I would say, maybe between 40 and 50 yards from me. And they were both walking directly at me with their heads down. So I knew what was coming. There was no doubt in my mind that
Were
they
they
were going to try to kill
silent?
me.
Did you hear any kind of growls?
No,
or nothing?
no, I heard nothing.
Okay.
Not a sound. No growls, no nothing. That's how I knew that their intent was
They were in
nothing else but they're
kill
going to kill
mode.
me.
Yeah.
They're going to kill me and eat me, especially now that I've killed one of their brothers or whatever.
Yeah,
Sorry,
yeah.
what?
Not to jump back, but I did want to ask the question, and before I forget,
Sure.
When you initially were looking at that tree and you saw what you saw them, and you obviously in amazement because you're looking through your binoculars and you're like, holy shit, there's I know what these are, but they are not acting like the atypical Dogman that you have seen in the past. They're acting playful, but were you too far to hear if there was any noise being made, like a playful noise or anything?
Yeah, I was a half mile from them. I couldn't hear, and I know they couldn't hear me.
Right.
It's just based on how they acted. But I forgot to mention, thanks for bringing it up. When I first saw them, that's when it occurred to me that they were youngsters, that they weren't fully mature.
Yeah.
Not only because of their size, but just their demeanor. They were playful. They were acting like what puppies would do. Their tails were wagging. I mean, it was not your typical, everybody on your show, the Dogman walking that's 9 feet tall and he's sinister and he's got blood dripping from his. No, these didn't look like that. These look like just large wolves is what they look like. I mean, they turned out to be Dogmen, but when I was looking at them, they looked like I could just tell they were younger. They were not as big, and they still had a youthful
demeanor.
What would I say? A youthful way about them.
Right. Okay. All right. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to see because
No,
I was thinking.
I
was thinking about that, and I knew that you did have binoculars. But I just, how when you look through binoculars at a distance and you do see something, especially like what you're looking at, it almost appears to be like a movie kind of. You're like, holy shit, what the? Yep. And I just didn't know if you could. Hear maybe the slightest whatever or see something that they kind of open their mouth or whatever, but because like you said, they were playful.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say. They were playful, dude.
Okay. So they were walking side by side 3 feet away.
Yeah, they had their heads down, and they were kind of prowling towards me. That's the word I would use. They were, I could tell what they were getting. They were thinking about eating me. I could just tell, right? Yeah. So I didn't really know what to do at that point. So I took a few steps to my right, so I could get back on the path of going. And I was going to keep backing up. And I was going to start trying to back up towards the embankment so I could get back up onto this ridge. For some reason, I felt like there was safety there just because I would have the upper ground on them. So as they're coming towards me, when I shifted the way, they shifted with me, and they were still coming at me. And they got to be within about, I would say, 10 to 15 yards. And it occurred to me, Jeff, I mean, you want to talk about a moment of like, oh, shit. I realized that I could not stop both of them before they got, if they worked in tandem, right? Mm-hmm. I could not stop both of them with it. If I had my scout squad with a 308 and semi-auto, then yeah, no problem. But I couldn't stop both of them with a bolt action rifle. And I realized it. Yeah. That I was going to have to shoot one of them and take the other one, let him hit me or come at me or try to kill him with my Bowie knife, which I was not looking forward to. So I had already started thinking which one of these, because one of them was slightly bigger than the other. So I was thinking, okay, if they both make a move at me, I'll take the bigger one, then use the rifle to block his advance, try to spin away while I pull my 357 out. That's what I'm thinking. And it didn't happen that way, but that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
So I keep backing up, and they're, it got to the point where they're within 10 yards of me, and I keep swinging. I'm telling you, these animals are intelligent because I kept swinging the rifle from one to the other. And when I would swing it at the one, he would stop, and the other one would keep coming. And then I would swing the rifle over to him, and he would stop, and the other one, we're playing this little game, right? It's almost like they knew that my gun wouldn't fire quick enough to get both of them.
Okay.
I can't explain it to you, but that's exactly. I don't know.
Just that
if you can
feeling
picture
that you
audience.
had. They were just like taunting you, kind of, because
Yeah, it was almost like they were saying, "You're going to get one of us, but you're not going to get both." Right.
right. Now,
And
really
I
quick,
knew
just for the audience, when he does say swinging, he's not meaning swinging from the barrel like a bat. He means going from one to the other, looking through the iron
Yes,
sights.
so I was swinging the rifle aim. The aim of my rifle, I was swinging to one, swinging to the other. Not the rifle. I wasn't using it as an expensive bat. No.
Right.
But I finally backed. I didn't even see it, dude. And I'm glad that I didn't hit it hard because I hit my head against it. I backed into a tree and I knew I couldn't go any further, right? Because I would have had to take my eyes off of them. I mean, to try to get your audience to understand, you've got two animals that these, I would say they were both 400 pounds. They were not the 500 and 600 pounds I've encountered before. I would say they were both, or all three of them were probably in the 400 to 450 pound. But still, you have two 450 pound animals coming at you, which is the size of two pumas put together, just to give some clarity on the size, right? 200 to 250 pounds is a good sized puma or mountain lion. So this is twice that.
Yeah.
Right. And there's two of them coming at me. So I did not want to take my eyes off them at all. And as I backed up into the tree, they were no more than 10 yards from me, right? And so I thought to myself, okay, which one, right? And now I was already bringing the rifle up. I had it in my arms, but I was going to aim for the head on the big one and then try to spin behind this is what I'm thinking, right? It didn't happen, but this is what I'm thinking. I'm going to try to spin behind the tree and let the tree, give me a moment just where I can drop my rifle, which kills me to even think about dropping my rifle because of how I am, right? But I was going to drop my rifle, spin behind my tree, and then hope I could pull my 357 out by the time the other one got to me. Well, right at this moment, I hear this, and I know your audience is probably going, nice helicopter,
like,
nice helicopter, Brad, right? So anyway, I hear this helicopter, right? And I looked up just briefly, right? And I saw, and he was maybe 500 feet off the deck. It was a white helicopter. And he went over the top of where we were. Now, I don't think he saw us. He didn't act like he did.
Okay.
I didn't see any. I couldn't see because of where I was when it went over. I couldn't see them who were in the helicopter, but I don't think they could see us either. Okay. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, well, when it did that, right, both dogmen kind of stopped for a second, right? And they both looked up, and one of the two stood up, right? And they both took a few steps back from me, right? And then it turned around. It went a ways, and then it turned around. And I think I may have misspoke in the email that I sent you, but it turned around and it made a second pass, right? Yeah. But it was only 300 feet, if I had to guess. It was a football field off the ground, right? I mean, it was low, dude. And it pushed them back. They both, because they had both re-engaged and were starting to come towards me again. And when it came back, they both darted away from me, maybe 15 yards further than they were away from me. And that gave me just enough time to get off that tree. I quickly slung the 03 over my shoulder, and then the helicopter was gone. It went back the way that I was going, right? And so I took that time. I pulled out the 357 that was on my thigh, and I pulled out the one that was under my shoulder, right? And I started walking backwards, and I said, all right, you sons of bitches, if you're going to take me, if you're going to eat me, you're going to be sore when you're doing it, right? That's what I was telling myself, trying to be macho as best I could, right?
Right.
So I backed up that hill, which wasn't easy to do. I'm backing up this embankment because it was about 150 yards, and I just kept, right? And they, for a while, before they started re-engaging me this time, after the second pass of the helicopter, they kind of stayed away like they were confused, it seemed to me anyway, like, well, what was that? What is this? And it allowed me to get maybe 80 to 100 yards because I wasn't running, and I wasn't even going to attempt to run because, first of all, I'm not in the shape that I could run anywhere near 5 miles because, remember, that's about how far I am from my car. Right. Number one. Number two, I was too weighted down to run anyway with 60 pounds on me. And number three, these animals were not going to let me just run away, period. So I came up with a scenario much like I used in Oklahoma when I had a similar scenario with a couple chasing me to make it back to the truck. In Oklahoma, I thought I will fire at them as they get close to me, right? So when I got up the hill to the very area that I had looked and first seen them, I almost was standing like literally in the same spot. When I got up there, I looked down and I could see them totally re-engaging. They weren't in a full run towards me, but they were like what I would call jogging towards me, right? They were on all fours. They didn't really walk that much on two legs the entire time. It was strange. Even though I saw them, they could walk. I saw one of them walk, but most of the time during this encounter, they were on all fours. Mm. So as I got up to the same spot that I had originally seen them in the hour and a half or so before, I looked down and I could see them coming up, and they were jogging, right, and they were picking up speed, right. So I thought, okay, I can't run. There's no way that I'm going to be able to run, right, and outrun these two animals. So I'm just going to walk as fast as I can. And when I hear them getting close, I'm going to turn and fire at them with my revolvers and to try to keep them at bay while I make it back. Now, you want to talk about the longest hour and a half of my life, knowing that they did not try to hide that they weren't like being, stalking or predatory, like hiding behind trees. They were literally right behind me. When I would turn to swing, I would swing around to fire at them. They would either jump behind a tree or duck down to the ground. And like move to the ground. These animals are incredible because they know what guns are. Yeah, it's just I can't even explain it to people who haven't experienced it. They know what a gun is. And
I think it's ingrained. It's ingrained in their brains. Like wild animals have that sense of like we were talking one night about people having something ingrained in their psyche, from just years and generations of things. It's probably ingrained, Yeah.
They know that they cause pain. Yeah. And I also know that they create loud noises and they don't like them.
Right.
So every time I would turn around, I must have fired, I think I said this in the email, I can't remember, but I think I said it in the email, where I must have fired 50 times at them in that hour and a half. Just as I would walk for a couple hundred yards, I would turn and they would be gaining on me. They'd only be 30 or 40 yards from me. I would fire. One of them would jump behind a tree. One of them would just duck down. And I don't think I hit either one of them the entire hour and a half that this game of a back and forth between us. I don't think I had any of them, not even once. Because I never heard any squelching and I never saw any blood, and I didn't see them react in a way that would have led me to believe that I hit them.
Right.
But as the hour and a half went on, I was starting to get more confident because I was getting closer to my car, right? I kept thinking, okay, a little further. I'm tired. I'm thirsty. My feet are beginning to hurt. At one point, I thought real serious about just taking my pack off and saying, okay, you know what? I'll come back and get it. Stashing it under a tree or something, and I'll come back and get it. But I didn't. And so this goes on for an hour and a half. And I finally get to, I would say, maybe half a mile from my car or so, right? And I'm trying to pick up my mind here exactly how it went down. So I get to about a half a mile, and there's a thick tree. And I decide I'm gonna stand behind it, and I'm tired. I'm drained. The adrenaline's gone, dude. I'm just tired now, right? And I realize that I'm at that pivotal point, but the things I do next are going to determine whether I live or die, right? So I put my revolvers in their holsters, and I pulled the 30-06, the 03 off my shoulder, and I say to myself, I don't have as many bullets, but if I can hit one, my strategy changed. I was going to let them come, and I was going to try to kill both of them. That was what I said I was going to do. I'm just going to try to work the bolt as quick as I can, maybe hit the first one at 50 yards, and then by the time the other one's on top of me, I can at least have one round into its head. Right. That's what I'm thinking. So I, make sure that I've got one chambered. I look out from behind this, and they're only 50, 60 yards from me, and they're coming directly. They know exactly where I am. There was no surprise here. They knew exactly where I was. They were coming right at me. So I took a deep breath, said a prayer. I got behind the tree again. Then I popped out behind the tree, and by the time I fired at the one, he was no more than 30 yards from me. And I don't know how I missed him, but he kind of slid. It was kind of comical now that I look back on it. He slid on his hands and his back paws, and I don't know if he hit something, but he tumbled when he was sliding, because I think he thought he was going to get hit with the bullet. He slid, but he tumbled head over. His actual body went all the way over, and he tumbled head over heels. And he kind of, and then it was at that moment, right, that the helicopter makes one more pass, right as this was happening, right as after I shot him and he tumbled, the helicopter, I look up and I could see the writing on the helicopter. I don't know what it said, but there was black writing on the side of the helicopter. It didn't look law enforcement to me. I don't know what it was. I suspect as I get to the end of the story, people will have their opinions about what it was, but I could see the writing on it, and when it went over and after it had tumbled, this particular one, and I know I didn't hit it because I didn't see any blood and it didn't react like it was hit. It just turned and bolted back into the forest. So I noticed that shortly before that the other one, right before I took the shot, that the other one was going far to what would have been my left, and was trying to get between me and the road, right? I mean, I know that's what he was doing, right? Because these animals are somewhat tactical, right?
Oh, yeah, they are tactical.
And he was trying, I knew he went wide of me, way farther than I would have shot, right? So he was like out of, I'd say probably 100 yards to my left, and he was coming. I saw him go by. God, these animals move fast. And he was moving fast, and he got behind me right before I took the shot on the other one. And then the helicopter goes over, he takes off, and I turn, right, and I'm looking for this other animal. And I don't see it, right? So I'm thinking, okay, well, either he took off down the road or, I don't know where he is at this point. So I start walking. My goal now is I'm just trying to make it to the road, right? Except I just feel like if I can get to the road and get out on pavement like that, I'll have a much better chance.
Yeah, there's a sense of safety at that point.
Exactly, a sense of safety. That's what I was looking for. So I notice as I'm walking, though, I see this blur. I look to my right just in time. I don't know if he was behind something. There was all kinds of trees, so he might have just been behind a tree. But I turned, and thank God I still had my rifle in my hand. I hadn't put it on my shoulder yet. I turned, and he wasn't more than 15 or 20 yards from me and closing when I lifted up the rifle, and I hit him. He was on all fours. He wasn't running on two legs. I hit him what would be considered his shoulder, I would imagine. That's how you'd say it was on his left side, my right hand, but his left side. I hit him on the shoulder, and I could tell it did damage simply by the way he reacted, because he tumbled to my right, his left, and it started. And immediately after he tumbled, he got up and he started running, in the same way, not at the very same spot, but in the same direction that his buddy had just ran. And I brought the rifle up. I chambered around and I brought the rifle up. And by the time I brought it up, I had him. If I would have shot, I would have hit him. But he was running away from me at that point. And I thought, you know what? There's no point in me, going any further with this. He's running away. And not only that, dude, I was about to pass out. And as soon as I saw him go into the woods, I kind of like spun on my feet, and I dropped to my knees first, and then I slid down to my butt, and the rifle just kind of collapsed into my lap. So I'm kind of sitting Indian style, looking at the direction that he just came from. And I keep looking to make sure he's not coming back. I keep looking behind me. But at that point, had they decided to come back and tag team me at the same time, they would have gotten me. There's no doubt about it, because I had kind of, at that point, I had blown my load.
Yeah, your adrenaline, you've crashed. Like you said, adrenaline is a drug. You're just at your bottom now.
I had reached the end. I had put up the good fight, but had they made an effort at that point, they probably would have gone. I'm not saying I wouldn't have fought, but they would have probably been able to get me. But fortunately for me, that was the last I saw. As he was like limping as he ran into the woods. And so I sat there for about, it seemed longer than it was. I would say, I don't know, maybe I was sitting there. It was probably 5 minutes. I got up, and God, this is, I'm just re-experiencing, I'm actually sweating right now because I'm experiencing that feeling I had. I got up and my legs were shaking, right? Almost to the point of they buckled underneath me, right? And I threw the 03 over my shoulder, and I turn, and I'm maybe a quarter mile, 3/10 of a mile from the road, right? And I see, it was a complete shock, right? And the helicopter was gone. It had made its 3 passes that I told you about, and it was gone.
Yeah.
And I turn, and I start walking towards, and here's this white dude coming directly at me. He's wearing khakis and like a button-down shirt, something you'd see on a golf course. And he's got a military haircut. Pretty decent-looking white guy, but he's my age, maybe even a little older than me. And he's walking towards me, and I'm walking towards him. We're about 100 yards apart, right? He didn't say anything, and as we're getting closer, maybe I'd say like 20 or 30 yards, he says to me, he says, "Hi," like you would just say if you were walking on the street.
Like just random, "Hi."
Yeah, "Hi, how are you?"
Yeah.
Right, like that, right? And I kind of nodded at him, and he goes, "All that gunfire from you?" And as he was saying that, I was passing him, right? And I didn't stop, dude, because I knew I could tell by looking at him he was government. What else could he be?
Yeah.
He's dressed like that. He shows up out of nowhere. He looks like that. He's got the military haircut. What else could he be?
Was he armed?
He did. He had a sidearm.
Okay.
But that's it. He didn't have any rifle. Him and his partner, his name was Steve, where he said I could call him Steve, and his partner Darren, they had some, I didn't think I mentioned this in the email, they had some sort of a badge on their waist.
Okay.
I don't remember what, like, it was a gold badge, but I didn't look, and he, but I do remember, I don't think I mentioned that in the email, I could see that they had a badge on both of their waists, and they had they both had, I think they were carrying 40 cals, both of them on their hip.
Okay.
But as I'm walking by him, he says, all that gunfire from you? And I just looked at him with disdain in my voice, and I said, "You know it is, or you know it was." And I kept walking, and he stops and he says, "Brad, hey, can I talk to you for a minute?" And I think he said before that, he said something along the lines of, "Can we talk for a second? We are cleaning up your mess." I think that's what I said, something along those lines that was it that way? Was it that first, or did I say that after? He asked me, he said, can I talk with you? That's what happened. And I said, what is it? What do you want? What is there to talk about? Right. And he's like, well, we are cleaning up your mess. Can you at least talk with me? And he used my first name.
Yeah.
So I conceded, and we start walking together, and he's
now walking back out of the woods with you at this point.
Yes, we're walking towards. That's when he said we did come to clean up your mess. I stopped dead in my tracks. Okay. That's right, and I turned and I said, "My mess," and then he said, Brad, we know exactly who you are and exactly what you've done, right? And so I'm thinking like, oh, shit, right? And I said, well, then you know that I came out here and I didn't, purposely go against the warnings that I've been given or disobey that, right? And, he basically said, I know, that's why I'm here. I just want to talk to you about it. And then as we're walking, he said, hey, would you, follow me over to my truck? So, okay. So, we walked a quarter or 3/10 of a mile. Actually, I was probably less than that. It was probably more like a quarter mile to the highway. And he said, how did he put it? He says, oh, where's your car? When we got to the road. And I said, it's parked down the road. And he kind of chuckled and he says, I told my buddy or my partner that was your car. and I said, no, you probably ran my plate and knew that was my car. And he goes, no, actually, Brad, I didn't run. And he goes, I just had a feeling that was your car. And I kind of thought that was strange that he said that. Yeah. And so as we come out and we get to the highway, I noticed that there's another white guy. He's sitting on the gate of an open Ford, what appeared to me anyway was a Ford F-150. And it had its door, the back, what do they call that? I'm not a truck guy. The tailgate? The bed door.
Tailgate?
The what?
The tailgate?
Yeah, the tailgate. There you go. The tailgate was pulled down and he was sitting with his feet dangling. And as we crossed the street, that's when I had said to him, I said, what's your name? And he says, well, you can call me Steve, and then that's Darren over there. And he was like motioned with his head over to his friend. And I nodded over at Darren. I kind of shook my head at him, and he returned it. And then I came up with it. I go, well, I'm not even going to ask what agency you guys are from. And he goes something to the effect, he says, well, that's good that you don't ask because we couldn't tell you even if you did. And I said, well, what is it that you want from me? What's this about? And he said, well, Brad, I need you to listen closely to what I'm about to tell you. So I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, oh my God, right? So I'm nodding and I say, okay, well, I'm listening. And he says, exactly what words did he use? He says, you're the only person that we have come across that has had the number of encounters that you've had with these animals and had lived to tell about it, something along that. I'm trying to remember exactly, but that was the gist of what he was saying. And I said, well, I guess it's just luck, right? And I said, I am pretty good with a handgun, and I guess it's just been luck, or the Father's watching out for me. And he goes, well, I think it's a little more than that. He goes, has it ever crossed your mind that it is a statistical impossibility that one person would have encounters with these animals that are extremely rare in the first place, and yet you've had multiple encounters with them? And I said, well, Steve, I said, it has occurred to me. And he says, well, it's not random. Have you ever, he brought up like a dog, what those dogs are called. I think bloodhounds, I think. Yeah. He said, have you ever noticed how bloodhounds will be attracted to a particular person and yet the other person they'll just completely ignore? And I said, yeah, I have heard of that. And he goes, and he cut me off. I started to say something else, and I think he interrupted me. And he said something like, well, it's almost like they're attracted to a particular scent of a particular person. But and as it relates to these regular dogs, it's in a good way, right? And I said, well, you're not about to give me the story or the BS that these animals are tracking or following me to my house or something, are you? And he's like, no, that's all bullshit, dude. He said they don't they can't follow you in a car hundreds of miles away. He said, that's ridiculous.
Right.
And I kind of chuckled, and he said, oh, okay. Or I said, okay. And he goes, but what we've discovered is that 3 to 5% of the adult population has a scent that attracts these animals like 10 times more than the other 90% of or 95% of the population. And I was kind of flabbergasted when he said that. I'm like, well, are you telling me then that I'm one of these 3 to 5% of the population, or what are you telling me? And he goes, well, not exactly. He says, you're probably, if I had to guess, like in the top 1%. And I said, well, Steve, I said, that actually explains a lot. I told him something along the lines. I said, everybody like in the Dogman community or, Bigfoot or whatever community, they all think I'm a liar, or at the very least an exaggerator. And I followed with, I said something after that. Have I done something, that increases my scent? Is this something that I've done as I've gotten older? And he goes, no, it's something like that. It's something that you're born with. And he said, it's completely natural. It's from birth. You're not, you don't do anything to increase it or decrease it. It's just something that they sense and they can smell on you.
Mm. Yeah. When me and you were talking, just for, shits and giggles, like we pheromones kind of like,
Yes, exactly. That's what he was alluding. He didn't say those words, but that's what he was alluding to.
Right.
And, I'm trying to think how the conversation went at that point. Oh yeah. And then he says, have you ever noticed, like, if you had a lot of weird things happen to you, like out in the forest over the course of your life? And I said, well, Steve, I always used his name, and he would kind of chuckle because we both knew that wasn't really his name, right? And I said, well, Steve, actually, I've had a lot of weird things happen to me. But I said, are you talking like besides the fact that I've had 5 Dogman encounters in 3 states? And he and his buddy Darren, they both started chuckling because that was pretty funny, right? I said, you mean besides that? And he said, yeah, besides that. And he goes, have you had a lot of weird things happen to you in your life, like in the outdoors or the woods? And I laughed and I said, well, now that you mention it, I have had a lot of weird things happen to me, both in the outdoors and in the indoors, which is true.
Yeah.
I said, it's been like this my whole life. And he said, well, now you know why. And he followed with, he goes, as far as I know, there's just like a handful of you in the entire country who have actually killed more than one dogman and lived and actually had a story to tell. And he went on, he said, you've now killed 3. And I immediately stopped him and I said, I haven't killed 3. I've only killed 2. And he goes, no, trust me, you've killed 3. And I know that obviously, right, and I'm the one that experienced it. He must be talking about those we wounded in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
When we got into that big freaking Dogman fight, we'll call it, right? He must be talking about that because there's no other scenario. I didn't fire my gun one that had that other one in Arizona that had the angel, if you want to call him that. There was no gunfire there, right? So I knew he had to be talking about the Oklahoma. So let's see what happened after that. Oh yeah, he starts getting into his truck at that point, right? And he says something along the lines of, can I give you a piece of advice? And as he was saying that, Darren walked around to the passenger side of his truck. And then I cut him off and I said, that's it? You came all the way out here to tell me, that? And he said, no, there's one other thing. And I said, go ahead. And he goes, if I were you, I'd stop going into any forest or national park altogether. And he could tell by the look I had on my face, right? I'm like, okay. And he goes, it seems like your scent gets stronger as you age. And as you age and your scent gets stronger, you become less able to defend yourself. And boy, those words, it was like cold water, right? Yeah. Somebody cold water throwing on me. And then I knew that he knew exactly who I was, because he says, you're about to be 55 on your next birthday, right? Which is true. I'll be 55 in October. And I shook my head, right? And I nodded, and he looked at me and he says, you know, Brad, your luck is eventually going to run out. So why push it? He said, you can make any decision and do anything you want to do, right? But I'm telling you what I would do. And if I was you, I would stay away from any type of deep forest or national park or anything like that. I mean, why push it? He said, you know, at your age, sooner or later, your luck is going to run out.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when he looked at me, he deadpanned me when he said that, right? Like he knew, like, you know, the reason that I'm standing here wasn't because I'm some great hunter. A lot of it was, in my opinion, the Father was watching out for me, number one. And number two, I just been really lucky. And I've been able to get in situations where I had the upper hand with these animals. It wasn't like I turned around one time. It never happened where I turned around one time in the forest and he was already on top of me. That's never happened.
Right.
It was always where I had enough distance to where I could defend myself. So he says, I said, so him and his buddy are getting ready. They start their truck and they're getting ready to drive away. And I said, so you're not going to have me like sign some NDA or warn me not to tell anybody? And him and Darren, they kind of looked at each other and they both started laughing. And he said, Brad, most people, he says, we pay attention to these things. Most people don't believe you anyway. And the small group of people who do believe you don't really concern us. So he goes, you tell who you want. And he says, this is where you come in, Jeff. He says, you can even go on that guy's show from New York if you want. And he smiled when he said it. And I knew, because you're the only person I know in New York. I don't like New York at all in any way, shape, or form.
No,
I knew that he had to have been talking about you, because I don't think
you've only been on one other show, and that other person is not from New York.
Right, exactly. So I said, you know, we're getting to the end, and I said, well, I appreciate you, you know, you telling me all this, man. And he nodded, and before he pulls away, he says, you know, listen to what I told you. He says, because you're going to end up getting yourself killed if you don't. Sooner or later, he reiterated it, right? He said, sooner or later, you're going to find yourself in a situation where you're not going to be able to walk away from. And I said, okay, well, you know what, man, I appreciate you taking the time to tell me that. And he goes, hop in the back of my truck. We'll give you a ride to your car. I said, no, because I still don't trust these guys. You never know. These guys take off and take me somewhere and kill me, right?
Some deep underground military base and torture you, some crap like that.
You never know, right?
Yeah.
So I said, no, thanks. I said, I'll walk. I got to decompress. And as he was pulling away, he leaned back and he said, you know, after that, anybody would. Take care. And then he basically pulled away. I waved as he pulled away, and I walked half a mile or so to my car, and I put my gear in the trunk, trying to think of anything happened, and nothing happened. I got in my car, and I drove home. I was home within an hour, maybe an hour and 10 minutes, and just the way that everything happened, it was meant for me to have this encounter, not just with the Dogman, but with this guy. I really believe that they purposely warned me, because maybe like and I hate to say this because it's going to sound like I'm boasting, but I'm really not. I'm just looking at it from their perspective. Maybe they consider me in their own mind, in their own circles, like as some sort of a celebrity. because of all these encounters I've had and I've survived, right? And I'm still standing. Maybe they took pity on me and wanted to warn me of what they know and what they haven't told other people. Right.
Or maybe they I never thought about this, because you and I have talked about this experience after I shared it with people, and the last couple of times we talked, but it just popped into my head with what you were saying, how they took pity on you. But with the way he said hi to you, like a kind of this hi, I wonder if they almost anticipated you being dead out there.
Well, it's possible. I do believe, like some of your audience believe, that these animals are either chipped or they have some sort of homing device, one of the two, where they know. Although I will say that I had not shot, right? When those, if you recall in the story, the sequence of events, I had not shot that one in the head before the helicopter made its first two passes. It went over us once, went down a half a mile or so, turned around and came back even lower.
Right.
I had not shot that animal.
Right. No, but I'm saying I wonder if they anticipated that you were going to be dead. If they were,
you know what though? You know what, dude? I just thought of something, bro. I did shoot the first one first.
Yeah.
So that means
the second
wow.
one.
Revelation, dude. Revelation. So that means, but how would they have had I don't know, dude. How would they have had the helicopter out and knowing, and they must have had it out before any of this happened. How did they know that? Would they just happen to be out at that point? I mean, come on, dude. I don't know.
Yeah.
Who knows, dude?
I don't know. Just the way he said hi, and walks in and just hi, kind of, and just it's strange. It could be, there's just a whole different kind of, like with Daniel, you can interpret it as an angel or ultra sexy, huge blonde Fabio, or possibly some sort of Nordic whatever. But like how, it's weird because this guy just comes out, like he's fresh off the golf course and, just, hi, how are you? Da, da, da. It's,
right.
And it just, I'm wondering if they were coming out to help you clean up your mess. Like he said, like they almost anticipated, like you've got that pheromone. They can smell you. And maybe they thought you needed the help. Maybe they were following you. Maybe they had been watching you. Or
maybe it's like you said, maybe they expected me to be dead and they were going to be cleaning up my mess.
Yeah.
Literally me.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when he saw me, he was surprised, like, hi.
Yeah.
I don't know, dude. It makes me think. But now that I think about it, dude, I'm glad that we went over this. I guess I did shoot the one before that helicopter because I was up against the tree. That's right. And I was already facing the two of them, which means I had already shot. So, yeah. Maybe there is something to the chip thing or the homing device because, I mean, what are the odds of a helicopter flying right over the top of us at that moment?
Yep. Yeah.
Wow. I'm glad we went over this, dude, because I hadn't for whatever reason, I was thinking in my head that happened after, but now that I think about it, it didn't.
Yep.
I had already shot the one when it passed over the top of us.
Yeah. And, I wasn't there with you, but like just the way you say he said it, and I'm interpreting his hello from the way you're saying it because, I'm thinking, you're mimicking the way he said it, and it just seems like, hey, hi, like a surprise, and yeah, we're here to clean up your mess, and like either you did kill one, possibly you got hurt, just whatever. I don't know. It's definitely a very interesting
But he
scenario.
did say after he said hi, though, Jeff, he said, all that gunfire from you?
Yeah.
Like he must have heard more than just to me, I took that to mean he's heard more than just the two shots.
Yeah, because you were shooting the revolver to get out of there.
I would have only made two shots. I would have only made 2 shots in his earshot that he would have been in. And that was when I fired at the one and missed, and he turned and ran. And then the last shot I fired, which hit the one in the shoulder, and he tumbled. Those are the only 2 shots he would have said. But he said all that.
Yeah.
Now that you're going,
how did he know that? How did he know that? You know,
yes, exactly.
With the revolver shooting, because you were walking out 3 miles, whatever.
Right.
With the revolver. So was he out there prior to that with you and just watching you from the afar? You know, and then
or are there speakers out there somewhere? Almost, right?
Who knows? Or unless the helicopter, I don't know, like when it went by, it could hear the rounds, but even that wouldn't make sense.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now that you're really making me go over this in my mind, dude, it's even deeper than I originally thought, dude. But I don't know, man. All I know is that they did. I'm grateful in one respect, because for whatever their motives, whether they were good or bad, they didn't have to come warn me like that.
Yeah.
And they didn't have to do that. They could have just and I wouldn't have known, and I would have, you know.
Yeah. Because what if it was some other guy? He might have not. You know, he might have not even had the clearance to share that kind of shit with you. You know, he's just maybe saw you, walked out with you, and just, you know, you when you meet somebody and you talk to them for a few seconds, you get a feeling about somebody. Maybe you got that feeling like, you know, hey, maybe you should think about going back out in these woods. You are going to be 55, you know, and, you know, you ever wonder why you've had so many encounters?
Yeah, he said that. I mean, it makes you almost like he was trying to tell me without saying it directly, right? Like, look, man, you are, in our circles, you're like a fucking legend, right? I hate to say it like that because I know that sounds like I'm boasting, but I mean, to them, if they know what we think they know about all of us, right? Then they know I'm one of these guys that I really should be dead.
Right. And then by not telling you, there is plausible deniability right there. You know, I didn't tell him shit. You know, I just said, hey, you know,
might want to think about not going in the woods.
Yeah.
That's that's my story, brother. And that's like, I'm going to follow what they say. I'll close by saying, you know, other than that one scenario, we'll get into that some other time about that I laid out for you, that I might be convinced to go back in if I had my buddy Kevin with me, and maybe you as well. We'll talk about that at another time. But other than that, dude, I'm picking up golf again. I used to play golf all the time. I'm gonna start playing golf again. If I do hike, I'm gonna just hike on really public, you know, where you see people all the time up and down the trail, and not going into the deep woods anymore. And I mean that too when I say it, dude. I'm not going, even armed, doesn't matter. I'm not going into the deep woods again, because, you know, if he took the time to come warn me like that, and they thought I was worthy enough for them to do that, then I should, the way I see it, I should honor that and not push my luck anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as a friend too, you know, I mean, he did give you, I mean, at this point, if you do go back out and you don't make it back out of the woods one time, I mean, that's on you at that point. That's not on anybody else. I got nobody,
like you and I have talked about, I got nobody to blame but myself.
Yep. So
I was warned, and I was warned directly by somebody in the know. So if I choose to go and do it again and I get killed, I very well, the last thought I'm going to have on my head or in my mind before I get eaten is, they told me not to.
Fucking Steve, I should have listened to him.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was my last encounter, dude. And I couldn't think of anybody else I wanted to share it with other than you and your audience. And everything I just said was absolutely true. Everything I just said was, as best I can remember, exactly how it happened.
And I appreciate you. I appreciate you sending me the email and reaching out. I mean, I know people wanted to hear, after sharing the Daniel incident, people enjoy hearing that experience. But, you know, I've had you on twice before this, and you've got charisma. You've got this kind of charismatic way to you that they, you know, so it's always nice having you on.
No, I appreciate it, dude, and I appreciate your audience. And but I'm telling you now, dude, in the capacity of an encounter, barring that one exception, I'm sure your audience will want to know what that is down the road, but barring that one exception that I told you about, this will definitely, in the capacity of an encounter, I will not be on your show anymore because I'm simply not going to do it. I'm not. And I figured the last time I have an experience, I should share it with the people that have been the nicest to me, and your audience was far nicer than the other show that I was on. Even though the guy that runs that show, we talked about it, he was decent to me, but he also wasn't overly nice to me either. So
right.
But
that's all brother, I got, dude. It was awesome having you back. I appreciate you coming on, and like you said, this will be the last time, other than if I have you on just to rehash an old experience or whatever. But thank you for sharing this with us, and I appreciate it.
No, I appreciate you having me on, Jeff, and I'd like to say hello to all your audience, and thanks for listening. And we'll stay in touch, you and I, because we've become friends.
Yeah.
So we'll stay in touch, and then if that other thing ever does happen a year or two from now, when your daughter's out of high school, then that may be something that your audience might be interested.
That'll be an interesting event. Yeah, definitely.
Then you could see, firsthand how these sons of bitches are attracted to me.
Exactly. All right, brother, I'm going to end this. Don't hang up. I want to talk to you a little bit longer.
No problem. Take care, everybody. Thanks for listening.
All right, so that was the cause, or part 1, and this is part 2, or the effect. Brad, how are you tonight?
Hello, Jeff. Glad to be back. Let me say hello to your wonderful audience. Hope everybody's doing well.
Awesome. You and I last spoke, I think, month ago, 2 months ago, and you had made note that you were not going out in the woods anymore. You were done officially after your last experience. You really felt kind of lucky at that one, and it kind of gave you a little wake up call. This isn't your experience. I know you're gonna explain all of it, but I want to, make sure that people really understand that, this is not your experience. You're not a man that goes back on his word. You when you say something, you mean it. So I'm going to turn the mic over to you and let you explain and share.
Okay, well, as Jeff said, this encounter was not my encounter. It had nothing to do with me, even though I do play a part in this. And as we get to that part of the story, your audience and you will see how I do have a small part in this, but not because I was out in the woods or had any type of physical or literal encounter myself. In fact, as usual, it was a strange set of circumstances how this story was related to me. I don't go anywhere, as I said on my last show with you, which was my last encounter, and I hope it will be my last encounter. I don't go anywhere there's not pavement anymore. I don't even go up, even if it's a well-traveled trail. If it's dirt, I won't go up it unless it's paved and that type of thing. And, some people may say that I have become scared, and I'm sure there's some truth to that, but everything I've ever said is true. And if you have gone through what I've gone through, it would make you reticent about going into the woods at all, especially after you have some government agent tell you that you really need to quit while you're ahead. Yeah. And so I took that to heart, and that's the reason why I will never, except for the one exception that one of these days we'll have to tell people about, but except for the one exception that you and I know about, I will never go into the woods again. So what I'm going to do is, for your audience, I'm going to read, this story was related to me 2 Fridays ago. And because it took me so long to sit here and write this out, because I was trying to remember everything, I wrote most of it a while ago when it was fresh, and then I finished it today before I sent it to Jeff. So I'm just going to, rather than me trying to remember the sequence of events, I'm just going to read. I hope that's okay with your audience. I'm just going to read the email that I sent to Jeff.
Yeah.
Because it's fresher, and the facts, I know people think I usually give good details, and I do. I try to, remember the best I can, but this was given to me by the people who had this encounter. So again, I want to reiterate, this is not my encounter. I was not there. I wasn't involved in this. This was told to me by three gentlemen in a diner. So I'm going to go ahead and start.
Yeah.
I'm going to read the email that I sent to Jeff, and Jeff has a copy of this. Excuse me. Hey, Jeff, this is your old buddy, Brad. I hope things are well. Everything copacetic over here. Okay, buddy. So first, let me state emphatically, this encounter had nothing to do with me in a physical or literal sense. I only know about it because of a weird set of circumstances. I know that's nothing new as it relates to me. That took place about 2 weeks ago. I believe this happened on Friday, June 28th. I was out running some errands in the late afternoon, and after finishing them, I decided to stop at a local diner for an early dinner. This particular diner closes at 4 o'clock. It's like a lot of old people go there. That's why it closes so early. So I got there about 3:30, had what I normally do when I go there, the Philly cheesesteak and fries. And I was sitting in a booth, and to my direct left were 3 good old boys who appeared to be hunters. They were, big into guns, hunting, camouflage, and outdoors in general. You could tell by looking at them. Turns out this group was normally a foursome, as the older guy who... or what I would call the leader. Anyway, he had a son. I misread there. Let me get back to where I was at. Oh, yeah, 2 of them were older guys, probably a little older than me. The third guy was a younger man in his early 30s who turned out to be the son of what I would later call the leader of these guys. They were all salty white guys who were big into guns, hunting, camouflage, and the outdoors in general. Turns out the group is normally a foursome, as the other old guy, who was not the leader, also had a son in his mid-30s who wasn't with them at the diner. Apparently he was still at work and couldn't attend the meal that these 3 were having. These guys had arrived quite a bit before I did, because when I ordered my food, they were already finishing their meals. And as I was eating, I could hear everything they were saying, almost to the point of it irritating me. About halfway through my meal, I noticed their tone changed, and they started speaking where I could just barely hear them. The young guy kept looking around to see if anybody was listening. When he did, I would act like I was looking at my phone. Just about the same time I finished my dinner, I heard the young guy say to the older guys, he was east of the 89 above Flagstaff. The old man said he must have been pretty close to where we were. At this point, I hadn't put it together yet, but I was somewhat interested in what they were saying just because of the location they were talking about. Then the older guy that I called the leader said, Brad must have walked through the sunken valley that we walked through. Naturally, as soon as I heard that, I turned and looked at all 3 of these guys. My first thought was, holy shit, are they talking about me? The older guy continued, it's hard to believe he was out there in that area with a bolt-action rifle after what we encountered. I knew when he said that they were talking about me. The young guy continued, this guy is either completely fearless or an idiot, or maybe both. And they all laughed. The quiet older man said he has encountered these animals a few times before, but even so, he must have been scared shitless. And as you know, Jeff, I was absolutely scared shitless. They all said some really nice things about me and how brave I was, not even being a hunter or an outdoorsman. They said some other really complimentary things, but for the sake of modesty, I'll move on in the story. At this point, they were getting ready to leave and wanting the waitress to bring their check. So she had brought mine. The diner was closing, and all the servers and the bus people were cleaning tables and refilling all the condiments on the tables. And as I was getting out of the booth with my check, I stopped by their table and I leaned over and I very quietly said, "Excuse me, guys, I'm sorry to interrupt, but by chance, are you guys talking about the Brad who killed the Dogman north and east of Flagstaff in '89? They all seemed surprised and a little suspicious. The young guy completely turned to face me and said, "What is that to you?" Can you imagine my thoughts at that moment, Jeff? I wanted to say, "I'm Brad, knucklehead," but I didn't. And I could understand their apprehension. I said, "You guys must be listeners of Jeff Nadolny's Dogman research channel." I forgot the paranormal part. I knew it had to be your channel because I have never given it to anyone else since leaving the other guy 2 years ago. They all looked at each other and said, "You listen to him?" I said, "Not only do I listen, he and I have become friends." And that did seem to take a bit of the edge off, but the young guy still didn't seem real interested in talking with me. The older guy asked, "Are you a hunter?" I said, "No, just an old surfer from SoCal." I had to give him one hint, right, Jeff, to be fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
The old man continued, and I did that on purpose. That was their hint if they were paying attention. The old man, he continued, "What can we do for you?" And then he paused, like asking my name without asking. And I said, "I'm Brady." And they all gave me their names, and we shook hands. The young guy who was already suspicious of me said, "Brady, that's your name?" I nodded and moved on. They got their check, and we started to get up to move to the register. I just came right out and said, "Can I speak with you guys outside?" They looked at each other kind of tentatively and said, "Okay," collectively. As fate would have it, their car was parked right next to mine. So when we got outside, I leaned up against my car and I began my questioning. Then they all on cue folded their arms, in the universal signal for being defensive, and waited for me to start. I said, "I overheard you guys say that you were up in the same area Brad was east of 89. The old man who did most of the talking from this point forward said, "We walked through the very area he must have walked through because there are no other sunken valleys anywhere in that area. And we were about 5 or 6 miles, give or take, from the highway." I said, "You said you walked through it. Where were you headed?" He said, "We actually were trying to find the area Brad was in. Once we found it, we moved north following a small animal trail." I said, "I forgot to ask, what made you go where Brad went, and what were you intending to do?" The young guy spoke up and said, "We had heard there was a den of these creatures up in that area, and we figured where Brad encountered them was as good a place as any to start looking." I said, "A den? What were you going to do if you found the den?" The older guy who was the quiet one, but he said firmly, quietly but firmly, he said, "Kill Dogman." I said, "You guys were planning on hunting and killing Dogmen?" The leader said, he said to me, "Boy, we didn't plan on killing them. We did kill them." They all chuckled knowingly. I haven't been called a boy in 30 years, but I let it go. I said, "How do you hunt Dogman in a den of them, no less?" The young guy smiled at me and said, "Fully automatic rifles with 40-round magazines," and then started laughing. I couldn't help myself. I said, "Holy shit," and I started laughing too. The old man who was the leader jumped in and said, "You ain't going to tell anybody you're not supposed to, are you, boy?" I said, "No, not anybody I'm not supposed to." I said, "I'm a gun guy and I have been my whole life, so forgive me for asking, but how did you guys get a hold of fully automatic weapons?" The quiet old man said, "I'm a gunsmith." I said, nothing else needs to be said. They proceeded to tell me how the 4 of them had decided to kill as many of these animals as they could. And just so I'm clear, I didn't motivate these guys to do this hunt. They had been planning this for a long time. What I added was a place to start the search. That's where I come in, not because I was involved or because I motivated to do them or I know these. I don't even know these guys. They used where I had gone on my last encounter to start their search, figuring there must have been a den or at least a population of these animals somewhere within hiking distance. Turns out they were absolutely right. The old man continued. About a week or maybe two after we listened to Brad on the show, we decided to go up there and see if we could find where he'd gone and then branch out from there. We are from that general area, pretty much knew where to start looking and retrace his steps. I said, "What are you guys doing here?" Meaning where we are. This is in northern Arizona, but a little south of where they live. And he said, "We needed to stop by the local gun shop to pick up a scope for his rifle," and he pointed to the young guy. He said, "We went up there heavily armed. All of us had fully automatic ARs and at least 2 handguns each, all 10 mil and 45 ACP. The young guy who's not here also had a .338 Win Mag bolt-action rifle on his back, and this guy, pointing to the other old guy, was carrying a Mossberg 590 12-gauge on his back. We were all carrying at least 5 to 6 40-round magazines." I kind of chuckled and I said, "If you're going to go after these animals, you did it right." I continued, "So tell me what happened." He said, "Well, when we got there and arrived, where we thought Brad had been, we didn't see anything or even have the feeling any of them were close. We got to the hill we thought he had initially seen the Dogman on, and we turned left or north. We followed a game trail around the base of these small hills for at least 2 miles. When we got to a plateau with a clearing on top, we looked across at this ridge that was probably a quarter mile directly across from our position. We saw a large, dark gray, almost black wolf sitting on its haunches, looking directly at us." The other old guy spoke up and said, "I looked through my binoculars at him just to confirm what it was we were seeing. I was certain, as were the rest, that this was a Dogman." The leader interrupted. As soon as we looked at him through the binoculars, he bolted down the other side of the ridge, and we began jogging down our hill and then up the other side where he had been. When we got to the very spot he had been, we looked down just in time to see him turn left into a box canyon that had hills on 3 sides and only one way in and one way out without going up steep hills. We followed him into the canyon with guns up and adrenaline pumping, only to lose him completely. He was gone. We scanned around the entire small canyon and finally the youngster. I'm using, just so your audience knows, I'm not using their names because I do not want to get these guys in trouble.
Right.
And so when I'm referring to youngster, there's 2 young guys and 2 older guys, right? We scanned around the small canyon, and finally the youngster saw a small opening, no bigger than a large manhole cover, high up on the hill on the left side. It had some shrubs around it with some fallen pieces of wood in front of the hole. It clearly appeared to be put in front to make the opening less obvious. It was about 30 to 40 feet from the top of the hill. The other youngster had the idea to go up the hill with a .45 in one hand and an M80 in the other. His intention was to toss it into the den to get them to come running out. Meanwhile, the other 3 of us chambered our weapons and stood shoulder to shoulder in the middle of the base of the canyon, pointing up at the den hole. As he climbed up the hill to the far side of the opening, we could see eye shine from the depths of the hole, but only just a little because of the angle we were standing at. When he got about 20 feet from the hole and to the left, he put the .45 down and took out an M80 and a lighter and lit it. He then stood awkwardly because of the incline and threw it into the hole. Time slowed down, and I watched him pick up the .45 and take 2 to 3 steps, and then we heard boom with a strange echo, which I think was because it was inside the hill. Within 2 seconds, as the kid was stumbling down the hill to the base, 6 to 7 dogmen came running out of the hole, barking and growling. We opened up on them, and it was a massacre. We pumped approximately 200 rounds into 6 or 7 dogmen. I said, now this is me talking to him, I said, "How do you know it was 200 rounds?" He said, "Because 2 of the 3 of us actually put a second magazine in and emptied them. 80 plus 80 plus 40 equals 200 rounds. This does not include the 16 rounds of .45 ACP the youngster had fired when he got down the hill. We killed 5 of them, and at least 2 were wounded." I lost my track there. Okay, we killed 5 of them, and at least 2 were wounded, but made it back into the den. They had an arm that was attached, but only by some thin ligaments. There was blood everywhere. We basically cut them in half. When we were done firing, we quickly reloaded, expecting a second group to come out, but it never did. The other young guy walked up the other hill on the far side directly behind us to get a look into the hole. He could see eye shine from at least another 6 or 7 animals. It appeared that they weren't interested in any further interaction. We thought about going on a full attack and actually going up and into the hold and finishing the job. I started laughing when he said that. I'm like, these guys, man.
Yeah.
And finishing the job, the other guy said we need to not push our luck, and we started backing out of the canyon, covering each other all the way back to the car. We were anticipating a rear attack the entire time we were moving back to the car. It never came. I said, that is a hell of a story, and thank you for taking it to those animals, and thank you for telling me this. I know you didn't have to. He said, it was nice to tell someone who believes in these sadistic animals. We got to get going, he said. They all said goodbye and climbed into their truck. I said, take care, guys. Make sure you keep listening to the show. I said that because I knew I was going to give this story to you, and so I wanted to, because they're going to know who they were talking to. If they're listening to this show right now, they're going to know who I am. Yeah. They're going to know that they were talking to Brad. Anyway, I said, take care, guys, and make sure you keep listening to the show. The young guy was sitting in the front as they pulled out. And as he faced me, he rolled down his window because he was in the passenger seat. He rolled down his window and said, take care, Brady. And he smiled with like a toothy grin, and they took off. I did get the distinct feeling that he was suspicious about who I was. I got in my car and pulled out. When I caught them at the parking lot driveway as we're getting ready to turn onto the main road, I was right behind them. I saw on the back of their pickup a sticker on the back of their pickup that said, you have to believe, with a picture of Bigfoot. One hell of a story. I was happy to have played a small part in what I call the Highway 89 massacre. My words. Peace out.
Yeah. Now, the reason why he did explain why he narrated it, kind of, when he shared this with me, it was, I think, a couple of days after. It was, I think, still in June. And
yeah, I think it was either it was still real fresh in my mind at that time.
Yeah. And I had asked a lot of questions because there was a lot of questions that had popped up. I'm just going to bring a couple of things up that I had asked because, where they were was where Brad was the last time he had just went hiking with his bolt action, and he had seen the 2 dogmen on this kind of ridge, and he had kind of seen them playing what appeared to be playing. And I was like, wait, was that where the den was? No, they were a couple of miles from there?
Yeah. So as it happens, so where I was in this little sunken valley, right, which I talked about in my encounter, they walked through that very same valley, and when they got to the end of that valley on the far side of it, they could see the hill that I was talking about, where the tree was and the rocks, and they looked up on that hill, and they actually, because they were there with fully automatic weapons, so they weren't really scared or intimidated by anything. So they weren't being quiet or anything. They were just, talking, and they came within probably 50 yards of that hill and were looking up at it. And there was no sign of a dogman, nothing. And so they started following past this little valley. If your audience can picture it, past this little valley, there's like a space of like 100 yards after the tree line stops. And then there's this small, I guess you'd call it an animal trail. It's a game trail where small animals use. You can tell that they use it because it's right up against the hills. And so they followed that for 2 miles. Roughly, according to him. And when they got to, it kind of led, and they went up onto a plateau. And the reason that they decided to go up on this plateau is because it was pretty clear. There were no trees in the way, so they could get a good view of everything. And when they got up on that plateau, they looked across, and there was like a rolling ridge with a tree on top. And right next to the tree was a Dogman sitting like a dog does on its haunches. It was just huge, right? And it looked at them, and that's when they realized, they looked in the binoculars and they realized, and then they started following it. And I happened to catch a glimpse of it going to this little box canyon. And when I say little, I mean, this is not like that 8 Canyon story where, the box canyon they're talking about is, 2 miles long and 4 miles wide across. No, this was like a little box canyon that was probably only, based on what I'm hearing him say, maybe 100 yards from one side of the hill to the other.
Mm. That's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. And they had the disadvantage, and the advantage. And I remember you and I talking about this because you always want to have the high ground.
Always.
They had the low ground, but they did have automatic rifles. So they did have the advantage.
Yeah, I don't think these animals, at least based on what he told me, and these guys seem like, these guys are, it sounded to me, I don't know these guys, and, like you pointed out, Jeff, the reason that you can tell this story isn't bullshit is because they didn't come up to me.
Right.
Right? They didn't come up to me and start talking about this and volunteer, nor did they know who I was. I overheard this. Yeah. Them talking about this. So to me, their story is incredibly credible, right? Yeah. That's a weird way to say it, but it was a very credible story. And you really, when you get in a situation like that, you always want to be, military tactics dictate that if you can, you at least want to be eye level with your enemy or above them. But there was no way for them to get into that position because they would have had to have been standing with their feet in awkward positions if they would have been on the hill directly across from where the den hole was. There would have been no way for them to really get accurate shots. And what if one of them stumbled down? So they decided that they were going to stand directly in front of the den hole down, 100 feet or whatever it was. He never did say how far down it was. He said it was about 30 to 40 feet from the top of the hill is where the den hole was. And so they decided to just stand shoulder to shoulder, with fully automatic weapons. And the guy that went up there, he's the guy that was the bravest, to be honest with you. He went up there with a 45 in his hand and actually threw an M80 into this hole. Yeah. And, like you were talking about, that's like an eighth of a stick of dynamite. Yep. Yeah. Which I'm sure pissed them off. And that's why they came out the way that they did. And then they were just standing there waiting. It was a pretty good plan, actually, how they executed it, because as they came out, they just unloaded. You're talking 200 rounds in 5 animals, maybe 6 or 7 animals. So what's that, 30, 35 rounds each? Yeah. Think about that. And we're talking 5.56. We're not talking about handgun ammunition.
Right, right. And, what, like you said, and I said as well right now, this wasn't fresh in your mind like the first time you told me. The first time you told me, it was like, I really think it was 3 days after, because you had sent me an email saying, get a hold of me, but I didn't get the email, and you texted me, are you, what's up, buddy? And then I'm like, I didn't get an email. And then I called you, and then we talked. And so it was about 3 days. So it was pretty fresh. Oh yeah, I was excited. I was almost more excited with their story than I was with my own. Yeah, because these guys planned this out. This was no accident or happenstance or nothing like that. This was my part in this. I played a very small part, but my part in this was they just used my story to gauge where they should start their hunt. Right, right. That's really all my only part in this, right? It had nothing to do with me. It's just that they said, okay, well, this is where he was. I know, and they're all 3 of them or all 4 of them are from that area. Let's say within 20 miles of that area. Yeah. All of them live, so they're fairly familiar with where it was. And they went up there, and sure enough, it happened. But I don't know. He never did say, the young guy. I wanted to make this clear to your audience. He never did say where he had heard there was a den of them. Yeah. But I got the distinct impression from these guys that these guys are serious individuals. Right. Like
these guys aren't me. That's just a guy with some balls that decides I'm going to go, like I did. I'm going to go hunt a Dogman. These guys I got the distinct feeling that the two older ones are ex-military.
Survivalists, maybe.
Yeah, well, be that or ex-military, maybe ex-special forces. I don't know that they were, but that's just the feeling that they gave me. They didn't seem to have any fear whatsoever of these animals.
Right. They were tactical on the way, because there was, and I remember this because when you told me, my brain was just blown away. But the one thing that made me think how tactical they were is the kid with the bolt action. His dad, when they were backing out, his dad told him to go up on the opposite ridge in case any came out as they were backing out, so he could have a clear shot at them to keep,
I didn't put that. Thank you for bringing that up. I didn't put that in this email that I sent you, but that's true. He was left by himself high up on the other hill, and he had a scoped 338, which is it's a little more powerful than a 30-06. So you're talking about, you hit him in the head with that, it's all over.
Yeah.
But he was up on the side, and then what he did was he covered their exit from the box canyon, and then when they got to the opening of the box canyon, they all spread out and covered him while he came down and ran out. So and then each of them would go 50 yards, and then they would cover each other all their way out. The 2 miles back to the sunken, and then the 5 miles back. They were completely tactical all the way out because, and rightly so, they thought there would be a counterattack. That these guys, these animals are very tactical. They thought that they would marshal their forces, and there'd be 8 or 10 of them would be following them, but they never did.
Right. Excuse me. I might be wrong, but I'm trying to remember because we had a conversation. We talked after you told me this, which was about the length of what you just shared. You and I talked for, I don't know, an hour more about certain things. I remember making a statement. For some reason, I keep thinking like there was no phone. They didn't bring their phones.
No, they didn't. That's true. They didn't bring he didn't tell me that in that, but the young guy, not the leader, but the young guy had said that, because I asked at one point, that's another thing. You got a good memory, dude. That's another thing that I forgot to put in the email. That was me asking the question. I said, well, how come you guys didn't get pictures? And the young guy said, well, we didn't take our phones.
Right.
And then I thought, that's interesting.
Yeah, because we were talking about how that the two government agents were that one that walked up on you while you were walking out and the other one that was on the back of the truck. How the hell they knew you were there, but they didn't know they were there. And I was like, did you have your phone with you? And you're like, yeah.
I did.
So maybe that was, because like you said, you had your phone. You were there. You had, had a little skirmish compared to this with it. Helicopter flew over, and then one of these guys came out at you to, address the situation or clean up your mess. But yet, there was no kind of repercussion.
I asked him, Jeff. I asked him at the very end of the conversation, and forgive me, I hope your audience will forgive me because I did forget quite a few things. That's why I started writing this a couple of weeks ago, but I'd say half of it I did today because I wanted to give it to Jeff. I promised him I'd give it to him. I wanted to keep my word, but I had asked him if he encountered anybody or any like government agency or officer from any 3-letter agency or anything like that, and he goes, well, why would we? And I said, well, I don't know, I'm just asking, just out of curiosity. And he goes, no, we didn't have our phones. How would have anybody known we were there?
Right.
So these guys, dude, I'm telling you, these guys were if I was going to go hunting dogmen, they might, if I could go with these 4 guys, they might convince me to go out there again with them. Let's put it that way.
They went, like you said, you felt that there was something different about the 2 older guys, you know, maybe ex-special forces, whatever, ex-service, but they had one goal in mind, and it wasn't getting pictures. It was, let's go hunt these things.
And they were not apologetic about it. So there's going to be a small part of your audience and a large part of some other people who do these channels audience who are going to completely would hate these guys,
right?
Because they're not about peace and let's go pray to them and get down and ask their permission to, you know, these guys are straight up what I would call warriors, and just decided, you know what? And I got the feeling that they were longtime listeners.
Well, they've killed, you know, like you and I said, Dogman kill. You know, like
they're opportunists.
Yeah,
yep.
Yeah. And I think you had asked, or one of them had said, but didn't get into detail, that one of them had seen a dogman at one time years ago or something like that, but he didn't get into detail, and it wasn't around that area. Like, they just used your experience because they were close by.
Right. That's true. One of them had mentioned he was out just hunting. It wasn't a tactical engagement. It was just he was out hunting, and he had seen what he believed was a dogman. He didn't get close to it. He was far enough away that it didn't see them. He was looking at it through binoculars, but he was convinced from that day forward that these animals existed.
Right. Yeah. You know, to me, this experience, when you told me about it, I was, you know, blown away, because I'd never heard anything like it, you know.
This is why, Jeff, let me just say, and I said this on another show one time, and I took a lot of shit for it. The truth is, dude, as evil and wicked as I believe these animals are, and again, I don't think that every single one of them is always thinking about killing humans whenever they get the chance.
Right.
I don't believe that, but I do think they're opportunists, and if they're hungry and you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, they have no problem tearing you, you know, into shreds.
Yeah.
None. And will drag you back to the den, and they'll all feast on you. I really believe that about them, right?
Yep.
But I said this on another show one time, that when you bring the full power of man to bear, these animals, we shouldn't fear these animals, at least not to the degree that we do. They should fear us.
Yeah.
Because this group proves that if 4 guys that know what they're doing, and these guys didn't even have grenades or grenade launchers or just fully automatic weapons, and look at what they did to them. Imagine if we had 12 Spec Ops guys that had rocket launchers, grenade launchers, fully automatic weapons, hand grenades. I mean, come on. You talking a squad of special forces could wipe out 100 of these animals. No problem.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is why I've never had the attitude that some people, not necessarily just on your show, but other shows have had, where, oh my God, we have to be, you know, these animals are we either have to worship them on the one hand, or we have to be so afraid of them that we don't, you know, do live our lives the way that we should. No, it's not that way. We are still, and I know I'm going to take shit for saying this, but we are still the dominant animal, if you will, on this earth.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when we bring our full power to bear, these animals present very little problem.
Right.
Very little.
Like you said, they're opportunistic. They are, you know, like me solo hiking, you solo hiking, you know, or random hikers, you know, Joe Blow that's out in Colorado somewhere that doesn't have a firearm with him. And, you know, like you said, wrong place, wrong time. Bam, opportunistic. You're
in a lot of trouble, dude. You're in a lot of trouble, and it's gotten to me. And I don't want people to say I don't fear them. I do. This is why I'll never go in the woods again.
Right.
But when you're talking about guys like this who have the ability to bring these types of weapons to bear, I mean, I took it like when those animals were looking when they were all still huddled in that den, and the one kid got up there and looked into the den from across one hill to the other, and he could see them in there. I got the distinct visual in my mind that they were all cowering in there because they knew that if they came out, they were going to get literally cut in half.
Right. Like almost they didn't know what to do.
Right. They were exactly. That's exactly right. Like they didn't know what to do. They were just hoping that these guys wouldn't finish the job.
Right. Right.
And these guys would have been fully capable of doing that. I mean, honestly, I think even if they would have went up there and stood right in front of the hole, I think they would have chopped them into bits.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I know that, there's going to be some people that hear this and be like, oh, you're starting, like I heard on the other channel, now it's going to be unsafe for these animals, for us to walk in these areas. It was already unsafe for us to walk in these areas. Yeah. Right?
Yeah.
This makes them think, as far as I'm concerned, this makes them think twice about just randomly attacking people because they don't know what type of person is this. Is this one of these people that has these weapons that'll just turn us into hamburger?
Right. Right.
And that's exactly what those were his words, by the way. He said, we turned him into hamburger.
Yeah. It's just, I mean, my view is, these guys went for a mission. They went on a mission, and they wanted to see that if they could do it, and they did. I don't suggest that everybody go out and unless you have the know-how of doing what they did, being a gunsmith and such, but not everybody can, so don't go out with your AR-15 and 4 of your friends with just semi-automatic and think that you're going to get out of there. It's just, and
these guys were serious individuals, Jeff.
Yeah.
You could tell just by looking at them. They all had that. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but like when you see a special forces guy or an ex-special force, there's an air about him, like a confidence, like there's no situation that he can't handle. All these guys had that.
Right. Right.
And you can just tell these guys, they put a plan together. They researched what they were going to do. They made their weapons better than what, you and I have access to. And, they drew up a plan and they went and executed it then. And that just goes to show, if nothing else, if you don't agree with anything else I've said tonight, it just goes to show that when 3 or 4 guys get together and decide they're going to do something, it doesn't matter, Bigfoot, reptilian, crawler, whatever. If you have 4 guys that are well armed, that know what they're doing, understand tactical awareness and all that stuff, they're a formidable force no matter what they face.
Yeah, exactly. You said it, and there are people that are going to be upset, like, oh my God, why, but just because someone feels one way doesn't mean they feel the other, like these things are monsters. They are not friendly. They're not like Harry and the fucking Hendersons. You know what I mean?
These are not furry woodland creatures. That's what I used to say all the time. They're not. And I'm not suggesting that we need to go exterminate every single one of them. However, if it turns out that they are not natural and were not put here by our God, and they're some sort of a hybrid that we created, well, then I have no problem for them being wiped out.
Right. This just shows that they can be.
Yeah, that's another thing too. Some of actually, I don't even think it was one of your guests, but some other people have said that, and again, it's possible, that there's some other type of dogman that is some sort of spiritual, or, I hate to use that word, but, can camouflage itself and bullets don't affect it and all this other crap I've heard. Maybe it's true. I don't know. I mean, if you'd have told me that Dogman existed 5 years ago, I would have laughed in your face and look at what I've experienced, right? So It's possible, but here's what I know. In my experiences, which have been many, and these guys experience, these animals are completely flesh and bone and can be killed and even massacred.
Yeah.
That's what I know.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not there's another type out there that exists that somehow bullets don't work, okay, maybe, but I've never encountered it.
Right.
That's what I know.
Right. You know what you know, and I don't know because I never shot at one. I know what I saw. I don't know what the hell it was. It just was really scary. But this the point of this experience was they can be stopped, and they were.
They can be stopped in a big way, Jeff. That's
Yeah.
what we learned from this experience.
Yeah.
And again, I don't want anybody to think this was somehow. I told these guys secretly because I'm sure I have my haters on your channel and other channels that hate me, and I'm sure he told these guys to go do this. I never saw these guys before. I did not know them.
Right.
I never talked to them before. These are people that just so happened to be listeners to your show.
Right.
And I overheard a conversation, and again, they didn't come to me. I went to them.
Yeah.
So what reason would they have to lie about this?
Right. You intruded on their dinner
Right.
and their story. They're shooting the shit, having their country fried steak and gravy, and out comes Brady to say, hey, I heard what, and so 100%.
I'm pretty sure that young guy knew who I was. I don't know it for sure, but I'm pretty sure
Brady is Brad with a Y.
Right.
That's the best part about it too.
He's like, your name's Brady? I said, yeah. And he just kind of smiled at me like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
I gave him hints. I mentioned that I was the
SoCal surfer.
SoCal.
Yeah, you did.
So if they listen to this, they're going to know for sure.
Yeah. So, all right, now I want to kind of switch subjects real quick before we end the interview. I was not aware that at one point you had a Bigfoot encounter. I knew of one, but I didn't know of one that was prior to all of your Dogman experience. And Brad and I he's never going back out in the woods ever again, unless, one thing does occur. But we are going to have an upload in the future, maybe not the near future, but in the future, where Brad shares his Bigfoot experience with us. That
and
you had shared.
I'm going to go ahead and announce, because I felt like I cheated your audience, because I know you had talked about this last September when I had a Bigfoot encounter in a different place, a separate, not up where I went, where we were just talking about this last encounter that these guys had, but in a different place, more like in central Arizona. I had a Bigfoot encounter, and I was going to tell Jeff about it. And I did tell Jeff about it, but then I panicked because they erased. I had a picture, several pictures actually, of very clear footprints that were 17 inches. And I didn't share this with Jeff because I panicked when they erased the pictures, and then I actually took my phone to the Apple store to find out if I could retrieve them, and they said that those photos, they never existed. They're not in my memory. Well, there's only one group of people that can do something like that.
Yeah.
So I panicked a little bit, and I remembered the warnings that I got. But that last guy made it clear to me that nobody believes me anyway. So what Jeff's planning on doing is having me give both of my. These are not fully engaged, let's put it that way, encounters with a Bigfoot where like it's a knockdown, drag out. These are just encounters that one was in 2006 or 2007 up at Mount Shasta. I was hiking with somebody that worked for me. And then the other one was last September. I was walking in a different place, hiking in a different place by myself, and I encountered a Bigfoot. But I'll leave the rest of that for the next
so it's going to be not in the near future, but in the future, because I know you've got some stuff coming up, and but it just, I never knew, and I'm not going to mention the channel or whatever, but I never knew that you had shared this on another channel and till last night, and I was like, wait, what? And you're like, yeah.
Well, I wasn't interviewed.
You were
he
interviewed.
Just read,
right.
He just read the story.
Right.
That's all.
And it's actually a very interesting experience, but we'll save that for a whole different day.
Yep.
But yeah, this was, I mean, thank you for, being a man of your word. And, like I did say, because I had made an announcement, I was like, in a week or whatever, I'm going to have Brad on. And, people, I said this, people have things that come up. People have, issues and shit, unannounced issues that pop up, and he couldn't come on. But you did. You finally were able to, and you've always been a man of your word.
So your audience knows I'm a financial guy, and there's a lot of things that happen in the market that I have to pay attention to and that I get involved with. And, sometimes it gets consuming because I'm in front of my computer screen a lot,
right.
Watching the markets and stuff. I don't want to give away too much of what I do because I don't want anybody showing up at my house. But I'll just say I'm a finance guy, and sometimes that means I have to work a lot longer at my computer during the day. And sometimes even into night. And sometimes with that, I get busy studying charts and stuff like that. And then I don't have the time to rap with Jeff about certain things. Not that I don't want to, but, we all have life and shit happens, right? So,
right. No, I just appreciate it.
I'd get you the story.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. And you've always, you've never said, you're going to come on and not. But except that one time, but there was a valid reason for it, and I completely understood. Which in the near future, you guys will know about it. So,
yeah, I panicked. I absolutely
Who
panicked.
Who wouldn't?
I don't want to ever find myself on a list, although I'm sure I'm already on some list somewhere. But when they erased those photos, I kind of panicked, as Jeff will tell you. I'm sure he's mentioned it. I panicked a little bit because, when that happens and you're like, wait a minute, I took these photos. I saw them on my phone, and now the Apple people are telling me that these photos were not in the memory nowhere.
Right.
Well, that's a little scary because they should have at least been in my memory.
In your cloud, yeah, or somewhere, but nope. And I remember that day, I've never heard you freaked out, and we've talked for a while, me and you have become friends. And, that day, it was a very short conversation, because you're just like, I'm like, hey, he's still coming on. You're like, I'm not coming on. I'm not even going to talk about it. Don't want to talk about it. Done. And I'm like, okay. That's pretty much the conversation.
And I felt I held that feeling for quite a while until last month or 2 months ago now, whenever it was that I had my last encounter, where that guy told me that he just looked at me point blank and said, nobody believes you anyway. You can go on. He even mentioned going on your show. So I was like, that was kind of to me like, okay, they really don't care anymore. So I'm willing to share. Those are the only two other stories that I have. I don't have any reptilian stories. I don't have any crawler stories. I don't have any ghost stories or anything. Some of the stuff Jeff's into, the paranormal, I don't have any stuff like that. All I have left is a couple of Bigfoot stories, and I don't want to build them up because they're nothing like the Dogman encounters that I had. These are just but these things did happen. One happened way before I even knew what a Dogman was. And the other one happened last September in a completely different place.
Right.
So, but I'll be glad to share them. We can make a show of it whenever you decide. If you want to wait a few weeks or
we'll wait a couple weeks or whatever. Let things settle and see how you feel in a couple weeks. But let's end this interview. Obviously, don't hang up because I want to talk to you for a little bit.
Let me say goodbye to your audience.
Absolutely.
I want to thank them for tuning in and listening to me. I appreciate your audience. I read a lot of the comments, and I really appreciate the type of people you have for the most part. And until next time, take care and peace out.
All right. It was awesome having you on. Thank you. And there you have it, folks. The cause and the effect. I really, truly enjoy having Brad on. He's a really great guy, and he's a really good friend. He has actually shown me different things that I have overlooked in the Bible and strengthening my faith in Christ. Just a really great person, and I really feel fortunate to have gotten to know him. So, and there you have it, folks. I do hope you all enjoyed today's upload as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps this channel growing and going, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we deserve. And that is because of all of you, and I do appreciate it. Thank you. Stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real. They are out there and dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless you all.